So I'm a freshman in college, or I just finished my freshman year.
Congratulations.
And thank you.
That's big.
It was rough. Yeah. And this has been on my mind all year. So all my life, I've been told that anxiety is wrong and sinful, and I think that's true. But I feel like it's kind of like fear in the way that there's a type that's okay. Like my first summer revival I went to, you were preaching on theophobia and how the fear of God is definitely appropriate and it glorifies him and it should be had by all Christians because it's recognizing his power and his authority.
Right.
So this is what kind of got my mind going, was in Matthew when Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. It says that he was sorrowful and troubled. And in Luke, in the same section, it says that he was in agony and praying earnestly. And then in Mark, it says that he was greatly distressed and troubled. So where do we draw the line of when like that distress is okay?
No, I think that's fair. I think that's very fair. For instance, the comfort and consolation and joy that should be the norm in the Christian life is not the verses nor the expectation I'm going to rush in when I have a widow who has their husband pass away. I understand the process of grieving, and I understand that. And even as C.S. Lewis wrote in his book on grief, A Grief Observed, when his wife died, he starts out that book with saying, I didn't know how much that grief was like fear. And it is. If you've ever grieved, really grieved, there's that same sense of unsettled, nervous fear. And in that regard, it's the same kind of emotive response. And you're saying, well, wait a minute, that's not what God is calling us to in Scripture. And yet I understand grief. Grief is a process that I've got to deal with. So it is with anxiety. As Jesus was going off to be crucified naked on a Roman execution rack by professional executioners who were called not just to kill him, but to torture him, see, the distress of that night, I'm all about the fact that this should not be a casual night for you, and if it were, I would think there's something wrong with you. If a widow is crying, and I'm with her at the hospital when the doctor comes out and says, your husband just passed away, I expect you not to go, let's sing a hymn together, right? I expect some distress. But I also expect, as Paul said to the Thessalonians, that it's tempered. There's a tempered distress. And in that regard, Christ's distress in the garden was tempered. Why? Because he said, but not my will, but yours be done. So I know in his mind there was a sense in which he was anchored in the midst of a stressful, distressing, agonizing situation, to use those biblical words, and yet was anchored in something that made it look different than a guy going out to be executed naked by Romans and be like freaking out, Peter, what am I going to do? Peter, what am I going to do? Right? He wasn't that, but he was distressed. And I think there's a kind of anxiety that can be reasonable in terms of just the sense that, my daughter in neonatal ICU, to have a sense of distress over that is that unsettled. The Greek word is merizomai, and that means to have my mind going in different directions. That ping pong feeling of what if? There's a sense in which you would say, I hope, that is a reasonable reaction to this situation, like Christ's reasonable distress in the garden. But even my anxiety, right, should be tempered. That I don't grieve like the rest of the world, and I'm not anxious like the rest of the world either. There's something different about mine, because I know it's not all about this life. That kind of understanding, I think, of the human emotions, of reactions to circumstances, great. But most people that bring up anxiety in terms of the Christian life, they're not dealing with, I'm about to go possibly be killed, I'm about to have my daughter possibly die, I think my husband is terminally ill. They're dealing with, I don't know if everyone on social media likes me, There's an anxiety that grips people. I'm not trying to make fun of that or be condescending, because I know people in this room struggle with that. But I'm saying, if you're comfortable with that kind of anxiety, then I'm saying, no. Cast your anxieties on the Lord. He cares for you, right? Turn that anxiety into prayer. You've heard us preach on that 100 times. That should mitigate my anxiety, I would say, in trivial matters to almost nil. But if you have something horrific happen, I would expect the kinds of things that lead to scriptural practices like fasting. Fasting is not, like most of us think, where people are just trying to get more in touch with God, although it can be used that way. Most fasting in the Bible is a reaction to a distressing situation where, like when I'm at a hospital dealing with a family in distress, I'm not going, hey, what, you want Cane's or Chick-fil-A today, right? They're not interested in food right now. Matter of fact, you have to try to talk them into it 3 meals later to maybe go to the cafeteria and eat a little something. That's fasting. That's most of biblical fasting, is people reacting that way. And it's a normal kind of merizomai. And I understand that. But I'm just saying, I think when someone says, I'm an anxious person, but that's just reasonable. I just want to know what you're saying is making that reason. Let's talk about the source of that. And then I think so often we can see it's that my prayer life stinks, or, I care way too much about people. I have the fear of man, not the fear of God. And if that's all taken care of, then I would say, yeah, the episodic ups and downs of an emotive reaction to distressing situations, I'm not going to rush in and go, wait a minute, you're just in sin. Look at what the Bible has to say here. And I think the Bible gives us plenty of room for that kind of lenience. The only exception I can think of is when God goes to the prophet and he says, I'm going to kill your wife and I don't want you to mourn about it, because I want you to show the people how much worse their sin is than you losing your wife. And everyone asked him then, what's wrong with you? Your wife died and you're not even grieving. That's one exception I can think of in the scripture where, for the sake of illustration, God expects no response out of a guy for a terribly distressing situation. But that was unique and the exception, which proves the rule, I think. Does that help?